The year is 1904. Russian Empire is a downward spiral to the chaotic end. War with the Japanese has been a major blow to the empire. Now their political plan to russificate ethnic and linguistic minorities is facing problems all over the empire. In the Grand Duchy of Finland, which used to be loyal crown jewel, is now full of nationalistic fervor. Political assassinations culminate in the death of Nikolai Bobrikov, the dictator of Finland. Nikolai Bobrikov was general governor of Finland starting from 1898. His master plan was to turn Finland into the regular oblast of Russia without special rights of governance that Alexander I had given to Finland. Finns were to be turned into Russian serfs without the rights of self-governance. Army, money, institutions, and most of all, language were to be turned into Russian. The constitution of Finland was being torn apart with haste. This act of oppression will receive counteraction that will end the life of Nikolai Bobrikov in the few years later. But who is the man that shall take this action against a tyrant? Schauman's family rose to gentry in 17th century through art of war. Serving in the army was a tradition for future generations. When Finland fell under Russian rule, the family continued serving as loyal soldiers to Tsar. From these Swedish-speaking nobles comes Eugen Schauman. Eugen himself was born in Kharkiv, Ukraine, where his father, Eugen, was serving as an officer for Tsar, and after his birth, family relocated to Poland, where his father received his next command. Eugen almost died as an infant to starvation when her mother stopped lactating, and the doctor recommended using nasal formula instead. Fortunately, they found a wet nurse to save him. Living as a foreigner in the distant part of the kingdom, the concept of homeland, Finland, became almost a spiritual topic to the children. Eugen's mother, Elin, was an important character to him. She read the nationalistic poems of Runeberg for him and to his older brother Raphael. She even bought a shadow theater set to play the scenes where Finnish heroes are defending sacred Finland against the invading Russians during the Finnish War. Eugen's and Raphael's first language was Russia. Eugen spoke Swedish with Slavic accent for the rest of his life, while speaking very little of Finnish. He was fluent in Russia, but refused to speak this language in his adulthood. When he was a child, he got a Slavic nickname, Gencha. While Eugen was a child, he played all the time with his older brother Raphael. They were known as each other's shadows because they were basically inseparable. City dwellers in Poland suffered from the lack of sanitation, and life was full of death and tragedy, even for the higher caste members like Schaumans. When Eugen was 4, his older brother died after a long struggle with the fever. He prayed for God to give back his older brother because he missed him so much. When his mother gave Raphael's old toys and clothes to him, he became very happy and ran around showing people what his deceased brother had sent to him. This death of Raphael was a shared trauma for Eugen and his mother Elin, which made them even closer. They discussed by themselves about Raphael in whispers in front of the younger children, who never knew about this firstborn son of the family. During this time of grievance, a large boil appeared behind Eugen's ear, but disappeared quickly. But unfortunately, that boil was a sign of troubles to come. When Eugen was 6 years old, he was starting to lose his hearing. For several years, many treatments were tried, but in the end, he lost most of his hearing. This loss of vital sense started to isolate him from the world. It was not the only struggle facing the family and Eugen. By the time he was 9 years old, his loving mother, Elin, died while giving birth to her sixth child, that also died soon after her. As the oldest child, the reality of losing his dear mother came with a fierce force. His father, Valdemar, wrote that when he tried to comfort his son, he was awestruck by his stern face of sadness that he could not bring himself to disturb. This boy was facing death like a stern fighter at this stage of life. Eugen soon started his official schooling after the death of his mother and moved to live with relatives in Finland. He was a late starter in school, and his poor hearing made him even poorer student. When he apparently opened his book of geography and saw Finland in there, he practically hugged the map and said, "My lovely home country," in thick Russian accent. Other children did not take a liking of this weird outcast. He was bullied through school years and came home with bruises and ripped clothes almost every week. But for him, the most painful thing in bullying was to be called Ruski by the other children. But this brutality of school children just made him more stoic. He did not care about the social stigma anymore. When the Tsar Alexander III died, he was the only student wearing the black ribbon of sorrow through the school day. He was taunted by other pupils, but his deafness probably helped him to isolate from this mockery. He was generally a social outcast and a loner, but those who came to know him saw him as a loyal and good friend. It took him 2 extra years to finish the school, so he became the oldest boy among his classmates. He was very athletic, and as an older boy, he could have easily physically bullied the younger ones, but he never did. There was a weird chivalry shining through this young man from very early on. Eugen, with poor hearing, had to sit right next to the teacher in the classroom. Although Eugen did poorly in studies, his teachers took a liking on him because of his good moral stance as a non-troublemaker. He never answered if he didn't know the answer, and was a very honest and straightforward young man. Only reason the teachers had to raise voice on him was to make him hear the important parts of the lesson. Despite a rough start in Finland, he became part of the local group of children. Although being quiet and passive person, he was generally well liked. In this group of local children, he met a 12-year-old girl called Elin Bergström, daughter of an industrialist. She bear the same first name as his deceased mother that he loved very much. Eugen had found the love of his romantic life that would never respond to his approaches. In Elin's diary, Eugen was just one of the many boys interested in her, but for Eugen, Elin was the center of his life that he could not shake away, even in the end of it. For Eugen, romantic love was pure as his love for his nation. There was no doubt, just firm feeling of light and righteousness. This ideological purity and firm moral stance is something that builds on him and eventually leads to his downfall. Even though doing poorly in school, he continued to pursue a degree in law. What motivated him was the prospect of marrying Elin after receiving a degree and a career. He suffered from low self-esteem, but the love of Elin and the love of country were things that pushed him forward as a man. The student life was full of nationalistic thoughts, which Eugen embraced, but the raunchy student culture felt alienating to this deeply moral man. While students discussed art and literature, Eugen could only focus in nationalistic poems of Runeberg, which were deeply connected to his late mother. These poems gave a strange sense of home while he was living in Poland as a foreigner. I don't think he ever came back to this home he was missing so much as a child. His soul was unreachable and buried in deep uncertainty. While Eugen was a member of students, he was not a gambler or drinker. One evening, while students were enjoying dinner, one of them stood up, faced Eugen and said, "You will drink like the rest of us or leave." Eugen once again showed his strong character when it came to morals. "In that case, I must leave, because I always want to be myself." Although being part of the group, once again, his deep chasm with ideological purity was showing. Eugen was serious-minded, who naturally rejected vices. There is another good story from his university years, when his student comrades wanted to take him to brothel because they were sick of his sexual inexperience with women. He was insulted and mocked brutally, and when he decided to leave, his student comrades got physical and tried to drag him to the brothel. It was a big scene at the student party, and it ends with him shouting to let go of him with the full might of his voice. They release him and curse at him for being unmasculine and dull. Later, Eugen laments that maybe the group of students were right and women don't like inexperienced men, but his moral stand was always strong in the end. And he wrote, "What would my late mother think about it? Or my future wife Ellen? I did the right thing." Physical activity was a large part of his soul. From young age, he went skiing every morning despite the weather. He was absolute in exercise, like it with his moral stance. He showed great talent in many sports, but he never wanted to master any of them. It was more holistic and spiritual endeavor that made his nation and body stronger. He was actually very keen and talented in fencing, where he met a man that would become his closest friend, Elias Roos. Elias Roos unfortunately shortly died after a few years of deep friendship. After this, Eugen never fenced again. There were other friends, but Roos had the most similar mold in his spirit. They were both trying to reach spiritual high points through athletic endeavors. And of course, hunting was a great passion for Eugen. He was very active in hunting and marksmanship societies. His deafness made him impossible to be a soldier that troubled him very deeply. In the nationalistic poems of Runeberg, a soldier must give his life to his country to rise higher in the spirit. It is the final leap of excellence towards the absolute immaterial world. But Eugen will find ways to reach this warrior's path to Valhalla. Eventually, Eugen finished his studies and got his degree in law. He got a position as a bureaucrat in Finnish Senate, which gave him a good knowledge about the layout and the timetable of Senate building. His career and life seemed to be going well, but his romantic pursuit for Ellen was troublesome. Ellen had many men pursuing her, who she loved to toy with in a foolish way. While others burned themselves in the love play and left, Eugen could not shake his feelings towards Ellen. For a moment, though, another woman called Liz became a brief romantic interest for Eugen. If Eugen would have put more effort into the relationship, then in the alternative reality, he could have found love and happiness and started his own family. But once again, Ellen sneaked back into his mind, and the relationship with Liz was lost. Like Eugen's mother with her nationalistic poems, this Ellen can't be separated from his heart. At this time, Eugen was suffering from different ailments of the body. Some were most likely psychological symptoms that manifested in constant stomach ache that the doctors could not cure. His soul was suffering in this material world that could not match his pure look of life. Eugen was not that spiritual man, but the ideology of nationalism was obviously a greater than God to him. For him, nationhood was his religion that held clear morals. Now this pillar was shaking his body. Love of Ellen could tame him and give him peace of mind, but it was not coming. What was coming was another Russification period for Finland. Tyrannical dragons were attacking the Maiden of Finland. If he can live for Ellen, then maybe he can die for the concept of magical Finland that his late mother had given to him. Valdemar Schauman was Eugen's father. Former officer, was working as a senator during the Russification, and he eventually resigned as a protest. He was a constitutional man to the end, believing that Russification could be stopped by legal means, while his son Eugen believed in direct action was needed to break the shackles of oppression. There was actually never a big political debate between father and son. Valdemar had remarried after the death of his wife Ellen, which was very bittersweet for the young Eugen, who worshipped her late mother. Valdemar's second marriage caused more strain between father and son than any political debate, but they were close nonetheless and went for walks almost every day discussing about politics in peace. In 1902, Russification had ended the Finnish army and conscription for Russian army was starting. This caused general strike and protests. At the start of the enlisting, Cossacks were roaming the streets of the capital city Helsinki to quiet down rowdy crowds that were whistling and shouting at the people who came to the enlisting offices. Eugen's younger half-brother comes to tell him about the scene. Eugen joins the protest and gets cornered by 3 Cossacks on horseback. He got badly whipped, but when he saw one of the Cossacks reaching for his saber, he took his knife and stabbed the Cossack in the chest. The rider fell down from his horse and was left lying to the ground, while Schauman escaped with his friends and younger brother. When they found shelter inside a building, Schauman was shaking from anger. Then he examined his knife. He noticed that the blade was not covered in blood, but it had bent instead against the heavy jacket of Cossack. He had given a good blow to the Cossack, but not a lethal one. His act of heroism was lauded by friends and family, while Eugen himself was disappointed that he had not taken the life of this scoundrel. His fight was witnessed from a window, none other than his great love Elin, who was very impressed from it. Now there was an even clearer link between nationhood and the love of Elin. In the next couple of years, Eugen and his friends were starting shooting clubs all over Finland, gathering weapons in large numbers. Motive was not the sport itself, but of course, to arm Finland for the coming uprising. Eugen himself had most likely two objectives: independent Finland, or at least returning to autonomy as a Grand Duchy of Russia. Troubles were heating up, and Russian and pro-Russian figures were assassinated in broad daylight in Finland. In this heat of the moment, life was reaching culmination point for Eugen. Eugen was never a member of Finnish resistance movement, but he held close ties with their members. Many of them were planning to kill the dictator Bobrikov. Eugen was actually asked to be part of the assassination crew in September 1903, but he declined, saying that he will do it alone, and he already had plans for it. There was an agreement that if Schauman would fail in his plans, and Bobrikov would be still alive in midsummer 1904, the group would finish the job. Once again, Eugen decides to act alone. He does not want to put his friends in danger. The act of killing requires careful planning, so that the Russian revenge can't reach the ones he loves. The endgame of martyrdom was starting. It was winter of 1903, and he had received a clear rejection for proposal from Elin. He is feeling sick, and he writes that the only doctor that could cure him is Elin. He buys a blue notebook where he makes various markings, mostly containing different aphorisms. His longest writing is about the concept of freedom, which is sacred and deeply rooted in human heart. Year turns into 1904, and he makes a will. He writes a farewell letter to Elin and to his father. He also writes another letter to Tsar Nikolai II, in which he takes the full responsibility of his actions. He tells that he is working alone and acting in self-defense. He calls the Tsar righteous and noble, who will have his loyalty forever, but his officials are acting against the law of the land. This letter will be found from his body. Nikolai II was very aware of the Russification process, for which he gave his personal blessing. Still, in his appeal, Eugen tries to give a political backdoor for the Tsar to flip-flop on the issue. Eugen resigns from all positions in shooting and hunting clubs. People describe him being more joyful and happier in his last months. He also buys birthday flowers and cards for Elin that will be delivered to her many years after his passing. In the final days, he makes a very clear reference that he can't join for a dinner in the coming weekend because he will be dead, or that he can't go for hunting either because he is chasing a big wolf. When one friend mournfully curses how no man has the courage to shoot that dictator Bobrikov, Eugen just calmly tells him to cheer up, because some man will definitely do it. It is 16th of June 1904. He hugs and kisses his dog Lucas before leaving his loyal companion behind. The keeper of the boarding house asked why is Eugen hugging Lucas like he would never see him again. Eugen does not answer, but asks her to give the fresh piece of meat for Lucas in a couple of hours. Lucas never calms down when his master does not return to home. The dog is so troubled that Eugen's father Waldemar decides to put it out of misery, thinking that Eugen would have not wanted the Lucas to suffer like this. As a former official of Senate, Eugen easily navigates through the Senate and waits in the upper staircase, patrolling the window. Bobrikov arrives to the Senate and starts to walk the Senate stairs up, where he's planned to hold a speech for the Senate, in the language of Russia, of course. Eugen rushes down and they meet in the staircase. Eugen shoots 3 shots at Bobrikov with his brown pistol. He aims at the upper torso and especially at the gut, which was suggested as a kill point from a doctor. Then he turns the brown pistol towards his chest and shoots twice. He dies instantly. Finally, that heavy heart of Eugen is pierced, and all the sorrow and loneliness can leave his mortal body. The old Bobrikov had medals and trinkets all over his uniform that ricocheted most of the bullets, except one that broke his belt buckle and pierced his stomach. He dies after surgery in the following night. In bigger picture, Eugen's sacrifice was in vain. Russification continues until 1905, when the whole Russian Empire breaks down from the aftermath of Russo-Japan War. So, that is the story of Eugen Schauman. Did he have some sort of immaterial impact on the nationhood? I would say very much, even though he is now a controversial figure. When I was a young man, I remember how my textbook in school described Schauman as a wimpy fool who never got lucky with women. I also remember how Finnish Prime Minister Matti Vanhanen called him a terrorist in 2004 and condemned his actions. In 2019, the National Broadcasting Company made television series about the nationalistic activists, describing them in negative light. Eugen Schauman was portrayed in incestuous relationship with his little sister, a totally mad and historically inaccurate portrait that makes my blood boil, to be honest. But that is the sensational mass media. Whatever gets the audience to drool is the most important factor. So where do I start? Why does Finnish Prime Minister condemn this man that had Ibsen concepts of freedom and fought against the despotic ruler? Former Prime Minister Matti Vanhanen comes from the era of Finlandization, when Finland was the little brother of Soviet Union. During the boomer era, the history was full of mistakes, and Soviet Union never did any atrocities, unlike USA. Matti Vanhanen came to power after the fall of Soviet Union and continued the tradition of working with the Russians. That lucrative oil and gas money made him a good stooge for neutral Finland, and thus he saw ideological pure men like Eugen Schauman as terrorists. Europe was very pro-Russian for economic reasons during the time of the statement. I doubt he would say something like this if he served as a prime minister after the Ukrainian invasion. But I think the bigger point is that Matti Vanhanen also served as the prime minister when Finland was opening its borders for Muslim immigration in the time of Islamic terrorism. This dangerous policy can be turned on its head with a straw man that Finns themselves were also capable of terrorism. Therefore, we should not be scared of Islamic terrorism at all. And I think it is the liberal immigration policy that is staunchly anti-nationalistic that has helped to push Schauman's legacy into small cult-like figure for far-right groups. If you commemorate this pro-Finnish dictator killer, then you are automatically Nazi or Nazi sympathizer by the liberal media. Only reason to remember this man of action is to remind public that Finns are also capable of radical acts of terrorism like Muslims. Maybe I am a conservative, but I think shooting a dictator in the name of autonomic democracy is a little bit different than killing random infidels in Christmas markets. Anyway, now Eugen is again alone and isolated from Finland like he was in his lifetime. Still, we shun on him. We refuse to accept him as a fellow human being. I wonder if any of his critics who call him proto-incel have ever had a drop of sorrow that this man had to face in his lifetime. They are mostly ignorant, who have never read his life story. There is a part of Runeberg's poetry that he underlined for himself, and I think these verses summarize his soul, and maybe every man's soul, perfectly. Enempi kuin elämä on lempi, enempi kuin lempi moinen kuolo. I am not a proper translator of poetry, but more than life is love, more than love is dying for love.